Hi, everyone. My name is H.T. Waters, tarot reader and writer. But I kind of consider myself more of a writer and storyteller than necessarily a tarot reader. But today I have a, I would consider a professional, if there is such thing as that, tarot reader, Helen. And she has the Eye of the Serpent tarot YouTube channel, which is excellent.
Thank you.
And so I just wanted to kind of open this conversation up to talk a little bit about your background
Hmm.
and how I feel, what I see your unique skills, and you may disagree with me, but one of the things I've noticed about you is your ability to take cards and round them around all these different types of spiritual backgrounds and other intuitive ways of reading the cards, which I think is a special gift. And as you mentioned previously, kind of esoteric.
Hmm.
Um, and so, if you can just kind of start from the beginning,
Hmm.
whatever beginning you feel comfortable with
Yep.
on your tarot journey, and what initially drew you to it.
Okay. First thing I might say is that I suspect what you're picking up in terms of that kind of ability is because I have a moon in Virgo, which is all about synthesis, and that's very much what I've done in all the various aspects of my career, sort of spiritual and non-spiritual. So I've got a truckload actually of Virgo planets and asteroids. So it's sort of inevitable, I think. And that's part of the reason I read in a very structured way. But in terms of, I mean, I came to this, I was born into it in many ways. Not necessarily because of anything about me, though. I mean, there could have been something in past lives. But I was born and grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I'm fairly well advanced in age now. And at that time, there wasn't as much. I mean, now there's a lot about spirituality and all that kind of thing, but there really wasn't a lot. And certainly here in Australia, there wasn't a lot. And I think my mother was a bit of a groundbreaker in that space because she was really interested in all of it. Her mother was, I think, a natural medium. We heard interesting stories about her literally seeing and talking to ghosts as though they were real people. So that kind of came down through the matriarchal line, I suspect. But she got into astrology. She read books, by Colin Wilson and some of the people who were writing about kind of ESP, we used to call it back then, rather than psychic
Right?
abilities.
Right?
Uh,
Yeah.
and and so she wanted to explore all of it. So we kind of grew up in this family, my mother and my brother. My father really didn't have much to do with this. I think he found it a little bit strange. But the three of us would, we would use Ouija boards, like, probably not a good idea, but we did. um, we used to, at one point, we lived in a place that had a big paddock outside, and we desperately wanted to be taken by the aliens. So we'd go out at night and wait for them, and they never turned up.
That's
So
yeah.
anyway, it's so lovely. But like, so I kind of grew up with it, and I think she was an explorer, and and it actually permeates how I kind of do things and how I look at it, because I think for her it was really like, isn't the world interesting? And like when you look at the
Right.
spiritual and oh, this is interesting, this ESP thing, or this is interesting, this
Mhm.
astral travel thing. And so we were brought up to kind of just be interested in how it worked rather than whether we were good or not good at it. And what kind of
Right,
happened
right.
is my brother got really into astrology and he eventually became a professional astrologer. And he was, I
Mhm.
think, in his day, way ahead of the pack. And he's unfortunately no longer with us. But
Mm.
he was an amazing astrologer. And then I was kind of the psychic kid in the family. So when we did
Yeah.
the astral travel, I was the one who could do it easily. I dreamed prophetically. I had this unfortunate thing. My mother used to like to read like, true crime and the kind of crime horror novels. And I used to dream what she was reading.
Oh,
And I'd get up in the morning, I'd say, I
wow.
dreamt about this murder, Mum. And she'd go, oh yeah, I was reading about that last night. And I'd say, could you read Anne of Green Gables or something,
Like, right, right,
please?
right. Something a little lighter, please. Yeah,
Yeah, so I
totally.
was kind of that, so we each kind of had our thing, and we kind of also, in terms of you saying about drawing a lot of things together, it's because we were interested in a lot of things, and we would sort of like pretty much every night before going to bed, we would sit around, what we'd call the kitchen table, and we talk
Mm.
about spiritual stuff, comparative religions, mythologies. My mother
Mm,
was really into kind of Tolkien and all that kind of stuff, so like read to
yeah.
us all that kind of thing. Greek and Roman mythology, life events, political events, social events. So it was, you kind of ended up in this very, Catholic in the sense of broad rather than Catholic as in big C Christianity, but that
Hmm.
kind of very broad crucible, I think, to grow up in. So that's
Hmm.
kind of what it was. It was just really exploring things rather than anything else,
Mm,
which has sort of meant that I'm quite open to what I can do and I'm quite open to what I can't do too. And I'm really interested in
right,
people who
right.
can do things that I can't do because it's not it didn't actually feel like spiritual development for us at
Mm,
all. It just felt like we were
mm,
curious. And then life kind of pushed me in a direction around it just serendipitously. I just happened to be at a particular, in the latter years of my school, a particular school that had a course that they were running at the time. It was called People, Beliefs and Society. And it was actually all about comparative religion and spirituality. And so
mhm,
it got to focus on that. It's really unusual at that time in your education. And we got to meet the Dalai
mm.
Lama because the teacher was
Yeah.
inspirational and could kind of like connect with all these things. So it was weird. It was sort of like I was nudged towards it, but more as an exploration. And so
Mm,
sort of did that. And then, but like we had tarot cards and oracle decks around the house, but I never really learnt it specifically. I always liked it, but I didn't learn it specifically until early adulthood. And then I went and decided I'm going to
mm,
learn the system. And from there, I started doing
mm,
reading. So I'd
mhm,
say
mhm,
people often ask me, "Oh, what books should I read to understand what you read?" I think I don't know what to say because I probably
mhm.
read them when I was 15 and then or I mightn't have even read them. My mother might have read them and talked about them. So it's a little bit hard to say, but yeah, I think I was kind of positioned in a family where it was going to be a thing for whatever reason.
And my impression of you too is that you're a voracious reader. I mean, that's you read a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think we've just frozen, so
Oh,
hopefully is it unfreezing?
yeah, there.
There we go.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
unfrozen. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Zoom has its
Mm,
its its issues sometimes. Yeah, yes, yes, and a lot of nonfiction. I don't read a lot of fiction. I read a
mhm,
lot of nonfiction, and I read a lot online and like short stuff and things like that too. When I sort of started like exploring things like through meditation or whatever, what I would do is
mm.
I'd do the meditation. I'd see these strange symbols and then I'd go and look it up, and that's how I got into alchemy
Oh,
because I
wow.
was seeing all these alchemical symbols in the alchemical process. I didn't know what it was. So I looked it up and then
Mhm.
went, oh, okay, it's interesting, and learnt about that. So sometimes again, something is directed towards, and then I look into it in more depth.
Okay. And so one of the things that I've noticed about your abilities now, which are different from mine,
Hmm.
um, or how I see what I can do. I see myself as more like a claircognizant,
Uh-huh.
where I have a deep knowing, but an inability sometimes to express it until I use the tarot cards as a vehicle to
Yep.
express it. Where you've actually talked very specifically about psychic abilities. And you're highly ethical with this, which I think is amazing. And we'll get into that in a minute.
Hmm.
But I want to talk a little bit about that part of you, that psychic part, because you say you have premonitions
Hmm.
and that you see symbols. Um, and then you were dreaming about what your mother was reading about.
Yeah.
Um, when you do a reading, how do you feel that connection works?
So for a start, and I've said this a few times on my channel, I don't believe there's a reader alive who can read for everybody. And that's kind of where the ethics thing came from. And that's more because I would sometimes go to readers who were extraordinary. And I'm talking about really specific stuff. And I'd send friends and it didn't connect at all, and vice versa. So I think that there's a psychic ability that connects. And one of the reasons that with the YouTube channel, I wanted to establish that so that if anybody came to me for a private reading, they've probably already got the psychic link because it's their psychic power that connects them to the reading. So what I say, and it's the best way I can describe this when I'm doing whether it's a reading for someone individually, though, then I think there will be a psychic link. It's just that it's not something I'm consciously thinking of. I'm just channeling what I see. But when I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing a pick a card or something like that, I think my role is as a synthesizing intelligence. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole bunch of information that's coming through. My theory about how this works is that we energetically pick up around people. It's almost like circles of energy around
Mm,
them, and we kind of
mhm,
come in and we can see what's coming in and not coming in, and but there's choice, there's all that kind of thing that can affect it. And if we have the psychic link, that occurs. But what happens with tarot is that I really like to use, I mean, I probably use more cards than a lot of other readers do. And I
mm,
do that because to me it's in the combination and the synthesis
mm,
that I find the message.
mhm, mhm,
So,
mhm,
and yeah, and that style suits some people and doesn't suit others. But I think for me, there's a kind of a telepathic link, whether it's me specifically doing it or whether it's my guide. I actually don't know. I do
mm,
know I go into a slightly altered state of consciousness because I don't remember readings particularly
mm,
afterwards. So I think something happens. So they feel at the time like I'm just kind of looking, oh, there's the story. That's the narrative. That's what's happening. The other thing
mhm,
that because I know that's kind of my role, I really like to use structure because to me, if
mm,
I go into a reading knowing I'm going to ask these 10 things around a particular issue, then I'm free. Then I can just channel
mhm,
because I know everything's going to be covered. And I do the same thing with private readings. Like I will say to people sometimes with private readings, I meditated into the question, and it really isn't me sitting there going or whatever. I don't do that. I just
right,
go,
right.
what are they asking? And like, how can I best approach that? And what decks would I use? And it may change a bit as the reading happens because it might point me in a different direction, but that's usually what I do. So I think of it being like a spiritual architect. And once the architecture is done, then you can
Mhm,
actually just
mhm,
go in and do the interior decorating or whatever analogy you want. But
mhm,
I do think there's a psychic link. I think that's how it works. I think
mhm,
everybody's psychic, but we're closer, I guess. When I talk about psychic link, we're closer to some people than others. So we will read better for some than for others. And yeah, and that might be spirit families, soul families, I don't really know. But that's kind of
mhm.
how it seems to work from my perspective.
Well, I also like the way I'm always drawn to readers that have a strong ethical approach.
Hmm.
They're like, this may work for you. If it resonates, great. I understand if it doesn't,
Yeah.
kind of attitude, as opposed to saying this is the absolute truth.
Mm.
Like in what I have seen historically is that, and if you were involved in the 60s and 70s, you're probably also aware of this. There tended to be these little bit crazy people that would have cult followings of people
Yes,
that would
yes.
say, the world is going to end on this day, right?
Hmm.
And it never
Hmm.
did.
Yeah,
It never did.
yeah.
But the scary thing is their power over people,
Mm,
right? Because
mm,
a lot of times people come to tarot readings because they're feeling vulnerable.
yeah,
They want clarity, they want answers. And if the wrong person taps into that, it's easy to manipulate.
yeah.
So I kind of wanted to get your, how do you create that framework around your ethics when you do readings? What is it that you lay forth, or how do you think about it in a structured way?
So part of it for me is that, I mean, I don't, there are some readers, and I absolutely understand why they do this, that say, I won't read, a third party reading or something like that. But I think that, again,
Right.
probably because I was learning tarot and everything back in the day where lots of face-to-face readings were happening as opposed to online. But there was a joke that people come to tarot readings to get laid or get paid. And to some degree,
Right.
there's some truth to that. So, but
Right.
I think, you can have levels of that. Like if and I have been known to say that, like if it feels like it's crossing a boundary into people who are not really even connected to it, that's probably not a good thing to look
Mhm.
at. But beyond that, I think for a start, it has to be, you have to sort of say this is, if it resonates and it connects, that's fine. Don't try and live into it, and
Right.
don't worry too much about something because if something looks a little bit problematic, you're being told about it ahead of time, and you've got free will, and you can probably do something about it. So
Right.
that operates. Um, I know, like there was a period of time where I didn't do it for very long, but I read on one of those tarot lines. And
Mhm.
I did it only because my brother knew the person who ran it, and it was like, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
okay, let's do this for a while. And that was fine. But every once in a while, people would ring up and they would be in financial distress. And I'd be thinking, like, they're paying a lot of money per minute And so I try to read
Right.
very quickly and I'd say, one of the things might be not doing this. This is a very expensive way of getting a tarot
Mm,
reading. Even though that was theoretically doing myself out of business, I just
mm,
ethically, you just can't go there. And I think
right.
if you if you have just those kind of basics, like, like what is the honorable thing to do and what is
Thing
the
to do.
kind thing to do? Like I'm not into not telling people if there's sort of something they need to know, but I'll always try and do it in a kind way, in a way that
Mm,
gives them license. Because it seems to me there's a lot of readers either only ever say what's good, and that can be
hmm.
problematic because we need to
Right. I
know both our
agree.
strengths and our weaknesses, or they're the opposite. And and then what tends to happen from what I've seen is
Those.
they often project their own darkness on everybody else. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
try and be in the middle path. Is that answering what
Right.
you want? I feel like I raved
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it does. I think it, and I apologize to viewers. The internet connection's a little glitchy, just to know beforehand. But we're still getting lots of information here, so I think it's fine. But I think it does, and I think it's the empathy and the truth telling, or from your perspective, and that ability to understand what may come about, and indicating you still have free will in all of this.
Mm,
And that's why the pickup cards, and I think you said this very before when we had a conversation, but the pickup cards are so valuable because that allows people to make a choice
yep.
on each of those, and they will hone into what they need to hear at any given time, as
Mm,
opposed to you saying this is the way it is,
yep.
or such, which I think is really a good eye opening for individuals who come to your channel, and that is important. I think people need to understand that to pick up on someone else's, and I do believe it's vibrational, because
Mm,
some I can tune in and actually intuitively tune in and read people's minds. It's
hmm.
not ever useful information typically.
That's a
I
problem.
think, right? But I can't do that. I
Mm,
can
mm.
actually, and so it's, but but every so often it is useful. But I was just thinking, you know, I don't know if you find this to be true, but I can't like pick lottery numbers. That doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
Oh
I
no,
mean,
no,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
No.
And so I think that might be a valuable take, is psychically you can't necessarily pick lottery numbers. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think there's certain things you can't?
Okay, so what I think is, and I have thought about these sort of things. Um,
Mm-hmm,
I'll answer it and then I might back up a bit and sort of explain where I'm
mm-hmm,
coming from. But I think it's because what we pick up when we read tarot cards, or even people who read without using cards, and they just kind of
mm-hmm,
like tune in or whatever, is we do pick up the energies of people. And I
mm-hmm,
often say one of my maxims in life is making decisions with imperfect information. Because we all have that. We can't see everything. And
mm-hmm,
tarot helps a bit by giving some other perspectives. I think that's the best thing that it does, but we won't fully know. So none of us can know because there isn't a human consciousness involved in what lotto numbers come out. You can't tap into that,
right.
I think. Whereas you can tap into a human consciousness for other things. Back in the day when I first learnt tarot, to be
Mm,
perfectly honest, even though I came from this really occult, off the charts, bit crazy family, grounded but
mm.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It freaked me out because I had thought, this is really just it's a psychological structure, and it is. It's very psychological,
Mm,
and it's a meditative tool, and it's useful on that level, and that's what I thought it would be primarily. And then I started reading for people and I got very specific stuff and it came true. And I actually went through a little bit of a spiral at that
mm,
point because I started to think,
mm.
well, it was a bit like the butterfly effect. I was thinking, like, if that's true, if that comes
Mm.
true, then do
Right.
we have free will? Do we have choice? Or is it all an illusion?
Yeah.
And is good and evil
Right.
true or not? And I
Mm,
personally believe very strongly in good and evil. But like each to their
mm,
own about that. And it
mm,
really freaked me out. And then I developed a theory in the end, and maybe it's just a theory that makes me feel better about it. I don't know. But I say when you read tarot and you predict things, or when you
Right.
dream prophetically or any of those things, you're not
Right.
seeing the future, you're seeing the present at long distance. And it's sort
Right.
of, so you're seeing like all the ripples of what's going on. And the way that I tend to describe it is like you're an eagle flying above a desert and there's these two roads and they're coming together and there's two cars on them. And at the moment, from the eagle's perspective, they're going to meet. So that's the
Right.
most likely thing. But there's always choice. So if one of the cars decides to stop and have a picnic, they're not going to meet. So
Yeah.
that's how I kind of see it. And it allowed me to go, okay, if you connect in energetically with people and you're seeing those waves, you're seeing the probability. The tarot shows you the probability because it has such a nice structure around you go from this to this to this as a normal sort of process, like kind of psychologically. That gives as good a prediction as you can get in a free will universe. But it's all about consciousness. So
Mm.
that's why, as I say, unfortunately, you can't get the lotto numbers,
Um,
which is
right. Right.
a problem.
I
Yeah.
know. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and all, well, there's a lot of, I think, psychics and tarot, and not maybe tarot readers, but psychics in particular that talk about, something about the highest good. And
Hmm.
having everyone win the lottery is not in
Yeah.
everyone's
Well, that's true.
highest good.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
we're we're all here to sort of learn something.
Yeah.
What do you think about? So you're talking. There's pathways
Hmm.
on Earth on a larger spiritual side. How do you see our time on Earth as being?
Oh, okay. Um, what you mean? You mean like what's the purpose of it, or
Yeah, yeah. If you think
yeah.
of it, because I think we've had this conversation
Hmm.
a little bit, is that I feel less like I belong here
Hmm.
than you have mentioned. You
Yeah.
said you're very earthbound.
Yeah.
This is part of your purpose.
Yeah.
So, what do you think on a kind of a larger scale? What would be the purpose of being here?
So again, stepping back, my belief, whether it's right or wrong, is that the
Mm,
divine created
mm,
us out of itself. So we're all kind of
mm.
sparks of the divine. We're not God. And I think that
Right.
like
Mm,
certain magical
mm,
traditions that reckon we can become God are a little bit lost, if you ask me. But like, that's again a personal view. But we are part
right.
of it. So I
Mm,
feel like we exist for the divine to know itself. So you have all the experiences and also for it
yes.
to grow and to learn and like the concept that you can only grow in time and space. So I think on a major level, that's what it's about. Absolutely. Some might be linked to Earth, some might be linked to Venus, some might be linked to the Orion, or the Pleiades or
Mm,
whatever. And could come and go at various points when the evolution of Earth or wherever it is, requires that sort of energy. So
that
I, I,
energy.
I
Right.
absolutely, well, I don't, I mean, I'm not saying I couldn't possibly have been in another, in a different planet or something. I might have been, but I just feel very connected to Earth, very connected to what's going on in the Earth at the moment. It's just something I
Hmm.
feel. And it came up in early meditations I had as well too, which is probably why I
Oh
think
no.
that. But like I think because we are all part of the same thing trying to experience itself, um, one of the really freeing things to think about, and I've found this helpful, particularly in terms of self-actualization, is that winning or doing well is just using your skills and abilities in the context to the best you can, and also understanding where other people have the skills and abilities, so you get a kind of Gestalt effect. That
Right.
we do best when we are true to what our part of the spark is. But it'll depend on context. So I truly believe that sometimes you have a life where you might be a king or a queen or a spiritual
Hmm.
leader or a president of the United States or whatever it might be, and in other
Right.
lives you may be sort of someone who is a street sweeper or someone who is a monk sitting in a Tibetan monastery, sort of like separate like that. It really, one is not better than the other. One, it's not
The
like, oh,
other.
we all
Correct.
need to be a king or a queen or
Right.
something like that. In fact, I think
Right.
those are usually pretty horrible lives, to be honest. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a kind of an ebb and a flow, and we come at particular times. And what we're meant to do is be true to ourselves. And what gets in the way of it is the world tries to sort of like cultures and schools and political systems and tends to try and push us into something else. And so, a
Yeah.
kind of sub theme in all that I do in the picker card is to get people back to who they truly are, because that's when
We
they're
are.
most likely to be
Yes.
happy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Their authentic selves. I agree with that. I think. fascinating. And so one of the things I'm I wanted to get a touch on a little bit
Hmm.
was misconceptions about psychic abilities, which we've touched upon. But one of the things that I thought was important, because you brought it up pretty early, was your practice with the Ouija boards.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Now, you said maybe we shouldn't have done that. And I'd like to know,
Why I said that. Uh,
yeah,
I
yeah,
do tend to think, and this again, like who knows whether I'm right or wrong about this, but I do think that we don't
hmm
just have in this universe just humans or just aliens. I think we have interdimensional beings, and I think some are good and some are bad. Like, or some are pro-human and some are
yeah,
not. And like maybe they have a
right,
perspective and they're good in their own universe or whatever. But I do think when you use something like a Ouija board, that you are potentially opening yourself. It's very hard to know. Like you're either going to get something that's real, which is fine, or you might get a trickster energy, which will just, send you off in all sorts of weird directions, but it's not particularly harmful, or you could get something harmful. And so
right,
we just experimented with it. I mean, nothing awful happened to us or anything like that. And in fact, the interesting
yeah,
thing was if I tried to do it myself, it just refused to do it. The thing would
do
just
it.
go off the board. So I think that like I had a guide that was protecting me or
Interesting.
whatever. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I do think that it, there is and this is again, this is just my belief, and nobody has to agree with this, but I think there's a kind of almost new agey belief that says there's no such thing as evil and that it's all one and we're all one. And we are all
yeah,
one in
right,
a way, but the point about evolution is to understand where we have the points that take us to something that's destructive. And and I
right,
think that there is stuff that you need to be wary of. But I don't. Interestingly
right,
enough, I've had people
yeah,
come to me and going, "Oh, like somebody told me I had a demon attachment or whatever," and I usually go, "No, it's pretty
mm,
unlikely. You'd
yeah,
have to have actually asked for it yourself." Like I think at that kind of level,
right,
I think there are universal laws. But so I'm not a doomsayer on that sort of level, but I just think
right,
being a little bit
right,
careful about it and understanding that you're dealing with something that's really powerful, and you want to have good protections with yourself. You need to know that and knowing what is yours and what is somebody else's. Because if you're an empath or something like that, like one of the hardest things is it's hard
right,
to sometimes know what's your emotion and what's somebody else's emotion.
right, 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 right. No, absolutely. And I do believe that it's better to acknowledge that evil does exist, and therefore you're in a better position, as you
Mhm.
mentioned before, to protect yourself. And have with that knowledge comes power, right?
Yeah.
You can make that discernment. It's like that clear cognizance that I have.
Mm.
I
Mm.
can. It's rare that I'm I can usually pick on up on that. And
Yeah.
I'm always kind of like, you never say things with a surety, because that's also can
Mm.
be
Yeah, absolutely.
a lower vibration in some ways, in
Mm.
my opinion. And the reason for that is, if I ever say this isn't going to happen, inevitably it will happen. I have had too many experiences with that. So again, not not being too narrow about what you believe your environment will provide, I think is important with our growth. And
Mm.
I think that might potentially, this has been my experience, be a potentially why the universe says, hey, yeah, no, we're going to show you that this can happen. So you know that if you put those boundaries around you in such a stringent way, those are going to be broken down. Those walls are going to be broken down. And I'm not talking about protecting yourself against the evil
Mm.
here. That's not what I mean. But what I'm trying to say is that if you have a caution about how things may occur, you're better able to prepare yourself, to your point earlier, to change the trajectory,
Yep.
like you talked about, that freedom of will.
Mm.
So I think it's important for people not to get too stringent in the way they move forward, and except because I've read quite a lot of philosophical books, there are philosophies that talk about being in tune to your soul, being in tune to the authentic self.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the authentic self, I don't believe, can be evil unless you go that path yourself.
Yep.
I hope that makes sense. But I wanted,
Makes a lot of
that's it.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
It does because it even goes back to the very earliest views of philosophy, which I sometimes talk
Mm,
about, where
mm,
we have like the freedom of will concept, that people think freedom is like I get to do whatever I want. But
right,
the
right,
old version of freedom was to be free of those things that take us away from our life path, take us away from
correct.
the authentic self. So there'd be things like, I don't know, obsession, lust, greed, all that kind of thing. So freedom was to be free of that so that we could be true to who we are. And that fits a lot with the Kabbalah, with particularly the Sephiroth Hod, which is about connection to the divine will and connection to your will connecting to the divine will and being clear on that. So I think that's very true. I think that the more negative influences are the influences that pull us away from that, pull us away from
Right,
that
right.
connection to the divine. But it's interesting sometimes too. One of the things that probably really informed why I do believe in evil, like evil acts and
Evil
evil
acts.
intentions and so forth, was
Mm-hmm,
actually a
mm-hmm,
psychic experience that I had when I was relatively young. I was sort of just at university, and I remember
mm-hmm.
having a dream, and in the dream, there was a nurse, and she was asked by these two young interns to go out for dinner, and she said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And I'm just kind of watching this in the dream, and then the next thing in the dream, I'm feeling absolute terror, trying to run away from something like terror like
Oh,
I've never felt in my life. And then after
oh,
that, I saw a body that had been mutilated in a particular way, and I'm just going to be very careful about what I say because this is going to
right.
be on YouTube.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
like a couple of days later in the
Yeah.
newspaper there was a story about exactly that thing happening and exactly that type.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I remember thinking at the time that it was my guide showing me something because around that time, I was at uni and I was being a bit of an intellectual idiot, to be honest, and like, oh, freedom to do whatever you want, that's much
Maybe
more important.
everyone.
I just watched the movie Clockwork Orange and it was
Yeah.
like all on that sort of thing. And I think like my guide was saying, I'm going to show you, Helen, that like
Yeah.
there are actually things that are more important than you just getting to do what you want. And
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
them is you don't hurt people and you don't cause that kind of terror. So I think sometimes when I've potentially like when I could have gone off on a really intellectually dubious line of thinking, my guide's kind of come in and kind of said, no, you're going to
That,
experience
yeah,
something and understand it.
right, right, right. No, that makes total, and it's fascinating because I, I don't have prophetic dreams, but what
Mhm.
at least as far as I know, but what I do have is remembrances of something that might end up in the news. I'll give you a great example of that. I had, and I remember this because I remember, just like you, I remembered the terror. I remembered the feeling. And
Hmm.
I was in a helicopter
Hmm.
and I was in fatigue. So I knew it was some form of war. And in this dream, I felt the terror of this particular helicopter falling and coming down,
Hmm.
completely blown to smithereens. About 5 days later, there was a report in the newspaper about bringing the body of a Vietnam vet who had died in a helicopter crash back home because they had just found it
Yeah.
in the jungle.
Yeah.
And
There you go.
so so I'm picking up on energy all
Mm.
the time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tend to be prophetic. And yeah, go
But
ahead.
like I think what I was talking about wasn't prophetic either. I think probably they're very
Yeah,
similar, what you're talking about. I think what we
yeah,
both did was astral travel to something in real time.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you can have dreams like
yeah.
that, and then later, oh, okay. So it wasn't that you were prophesying this, because it already happened. And the same thing
Happened,
with
right?
with the dream that I had. I mean, I think
Yeah,
prophetic
yeah,
dreams are where you dream a day or two or a week or two before something happens. That's prophetic. But I think
right,
there's astral travel as well too. And I
right.
and I would say that was very real. I would say, and who knows why it might have been that you were sent to comfort that person.
Possible. Yeah, yeah. I've been. I think I do have that ability to
Hmm.
kind of excuse the sixth sense. I
Yep.
see dead people.
Yep.
That has actually happened to me, and I've
Hmm.
been told maybe you should utilize that
Yeah.
to, and I have done. I have comforted individuals that have passed over. At least I believe so. So
Mhm.
it's all part of that energy, that spirit of potentially. But there and there's a lot of what you have out there, um, different ideas about what psychics do and how they do it,
Mm,
and
mm,
whether or not it's useful. And one of the things that people will disagree with is that people don't get stuck here on Earth. Spirit doesn't get stuck here on Earth, and I actually don't agree with that. I do think that that energy, that residual energy can get stuck, and
mm.
that needs to be released.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have an opinion about that or how you see it.
I think I probably agree with you. I think that people can have an attachment to the light. I mean, I think a lot of people like, there's probably very few deaths, to be honest, that happen with people knowing that's coming up. It does happen and
Mhm.
hopefully
Yeah.
reasonably peacefully. But I think I half suspect when I die that I'm going to be a bit surprised.
I still,
And I
yeah.
think because it's like you're not expecting it, like it's never going to come at the time you absolutely expect it. And I think that can happen, and energies can be around. And it's interesting when my brother died, a number of his friends said they saw and talked to him afterwards, and he was a little bit kind of
Oh,
like,
wow.
oh. So
Interesting.
and I believe that. I believe that that did
Hmm.
happen. So I do think it, but I think eventually, hopefully eventually, and mediums can help with releasing, and eventually the people can then like accept and move into the next stage and all that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
yeah, I do think that. And like as I said, my mother's mother, one of the sort of like main stories that I heard about that was one night she was walking home, was sort of like in sort of early evening walking home, and she was just kind of coming up to her next door neighbor's place when this person runs up to her and goes, "Is so and so, whoever the neighbor was, home? I really need to see this person." And she said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but he's actually away at the moment." And the person was saying, "Oh, I really wanted to see him." Anyway, what she found out like a day or two later was that the person who came up there was a friend of the neighbor,
Hmm.
and at the moment
Hmm.
that she did that, he just died in a train crash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I think,
Oh, my gosh.
sometimes it's like, oh God, this has happened. I've got to get a message to someone and
To
that kind
somebody,
of thing.
right?
So yeah, I mean, I do believe that. The thing that I find really interesting is the concept of how long we stay within that identity, because I think, our soul is bigger than whatever that is, because we have many, well, I
Right.
believe that we have many
Right. Yeah.
incarnations. But I do think
Yeah.
that sometimes there's that residual energy and it takes a little bit to detach.
Right. 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 And you'll hear, and so there's a lot of theories out there, and I think that, um, and some of them will, as you, and this is what I truly believe too, it's what resonates with you.
Mm.
And but going back to the ethical side of things is that understanding that you bring that narrative too, that you're saying, hey, this is what I believe,
Mm.
and taking ownership of that when you're talking to either in personal readings or something like that, because there's a difference between a philosophical foundation
Yep.
and
Mm.
doing a reading based on someone's personal situation, right?
Yeah.
And trying to open that up. And that's what so impressed me with you, because you've actually come to this and say, I did, and you don't remember readings, I know, but I remember the ones you've done for me,
Okay.
is that
Okay.
you actually mentioned in the reading that you did for me, I don't actually believe this, but I find this question to be fascinating because I wanted to see how it looked. And it had something to do with karma.
Hmm.
And the fact that I, I do believe that, the give and take of karma, um, can potentially keep someone on earth.
Hmm.
But I came to the reading with, I really believe I don't have that, but I want to make sure I don't do anything that will attach me to.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. It's understandable.
And you came back and said, no, I found this. question because you didn't really philosophically believe, because the assumption in that question itself wasn't necessarily something you believed. And
Mm.
what you did, you came to me and said, yeah, but the cards are telling me you won't be able to do that. You're not going to be in a position where whatever you're doing on earth will do that. But it was an interesting
Mm.
conversation because I really believed you honed into the idea that philosophically, I believe something potentially different than what you were coming to the table with.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was just an example of what I had remembered. Um, that said, there was one thing I did want to hopefully give some of our viewers some ideas of interpretations. And
Hmm.
we talked about this early on about you have a very holistic,
Yep.
connective way of reading cards, and I do too. I think there's stories,
Yep.
um, but uh, but but I think what's unique about you is that your readings bring that to the table in a story way, but you still take on those archetypes and
Mm.
those information. So I want to kind of talk a little bit lightly about the bugaboo that you get with the death card, that
Okay.
people kind of often misinterpret that, or and I'm making some assumptions here, but I'd like to
Yeah.
hear your take on that.
So the death card, I mean, it maybe it just has to do with how I learned, and I learned originally just the kind of Rider-Waite-Smith type of way of reading, and I saw it very much as a psychological storyline. And like the death card happens right about midway through the major arcana. So if it was literally death, then that would be the end, would it not? So that right there, you've got the story. This is not about a physical death or anything like that.
Right.
But the way that I learned it, and I have found this has worked really well in readings over the years, is that there are like three. To me, there are three major choice cards in the major arcana. There's choice. All the twos are choices in the minor arcana, but the three major ones are the lovers, which tends to be about relationship choices of one form or another. The two that are a bit more agnostic about topic are death and judgment. And the way
Mm-hmm.
that I learned it was that the death card is a transition that is a choice. You are going to have to make the choice. You're like at a crossroads, but you have time because you're like midway in the journey. You have time to kind of work out. And you could even trundle off somewhere else and then come back and make the choice a bit later. Whereas when you get to judgment, it's like you're at the point like, yeah, you've got to make a choice because at some point, one or both of those options are going to close off if you don't choose. And the way that I tend to describe it, it's a bit like if you get a job offer. You've only got a day or two to make up your mind, or they'll go and offer it to someone else. So it's
Mm-hmm.
I see it as choices. They are big ticket things because they're major arcana, and you probably do have to make a choice at some point, but you've got a little bit more time with the death card. That's the way I view it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that interestingly with the symbolism, like I don't have a Rider-Waite deck. I just don't have one in my collection actually, but I do have a really cute, the cheeky tarot is really based
Yeah.
on that. Like in this one, it says the end on the.
Mm.
So
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's
right.
it's a little bit more kind of okay, you've got to make a decision, but you do have the
Decision.
choice.
Yeah.
But it is about major changes as well too, and you can sort of see the Hierophant sort of like praying down there, like what do I do? So things are changing, and I think it does pick up major changes that are happening in the world or politically and all that kind of thing. But what is usually on that flag is a white rose. And
Right.
and that's
Right.
very alchemical, and that is the combination of the material and the spiritual. So
Okay.
because the red rose is earlier in the alchemical process, and that's kind of the physical passions and all that kind of thing. By the time it gets
Mm-hmm.
to the
Mm-hmm.
white absorbs it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's also something with the death card that it's like a little bit past halfway in the major arcana journey, and I think that it kind of is. There's been a lot of like learning absorbed at this point, and it's almost like if you had to look at it as a transition more generally, I would say it's a transition from the maturation process to the spiritually mature process. It's kind of how I would view it.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel, I mean, I often say to people, don't worry, this is not death. He's going to die. I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's my ethics or whether it's my spirit guide, I tend to think it's my spirit guide. It just won't come up in a reading for me. I
Come
will
out there,
sometimes
right?
say to people, if something like that came up in the eighth house, for instance, if I was doing an astrology based reading, I'll go, this will only apply if it's already happened. If someone around you has already died, then this is telling you maybe there are inheritance matters to look at and things like that. But it's not going to be predictive. It won't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I have a question about comparatively.
Hmm.
If you got because you talk about the death card as change. How about the tower card? Do you
Okay.
see that in the same light?
Um, I actually like the tower card. People go, ooh, tower. I mean, what
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it follows that. So once you've actually had that kind of thing, then you get the tower card. There it is in the cheeky
Yeah,
tarot.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I like it because I think that it clears out anything that needs to clear out. But I do recognize sometimes it's a shock. Sometimes it will be a shock. What I learned really early in the piece that I think has proven out is that the tower is a card to make friends with. When a major change is occurring, go with the flow and then see
Mm,
what you clear out and what you can go with. It's only really when you resist it that you have a problem. And again, it's like
yeah.
I kind of say, if you're in a workplace and everything is pointing to this is a disaster and you just keep hanging on,
Mm,
then the tower will come along. You'll be made redundant, you'll be sacked or something like
mm,
that because
mm,
all the signs were this
yeah.
is not working for you.
Mm,
So
I
it's
see.
it's scary for those who don't like change, I think. But for
Yeah,
those
yeah.
who are open to change, then you can prepare a lot and you can work out, what you'd carry with you if you were moving away from something.
So it was, so you kind of perceive the tower as being of forcing the hand
Mm.
moment,
Mm.
but you still have a degree of choice. So if you don't do it, change, this is
It's going
what's
to
going to
happen.
happen. This is
It's
what
going to
happened.
happen.
Yeah.
And it might not happen the most pleasant way, or you can go with it and have a bit more control. The other thing, too, is with the Tower card, it has a very specific meaning to me. And this is, again, through years of reading and what I've seen when
Mm,
it turns up in a relationship reading. I tend to
mhm,
say a Tower relationship is an incredibly intense one. And it's
mhm,
interesting because quite often when you read for people and you go, oh, there's a really intense connection here, they think that means it's going to work out. But what I tend to say is, well, you might say the greatest force in the universe is love, and hopefully it is, but it's got a pretty strong rival in fear,
mm,
particularly when we are
mm,
vulnerable. And if we have an intense attraction to someone, we're very vulnerable to them. And I think when the Tower card turns up, what it's trying to tell the person who's come to the reading is understand either you or the other person or both of you, if it's turned up for both of you are very vulnerable in this situation. And so you're not necessarily, when you're interpreting what they do or don't do, whether they call or don't call, like all that kind of thing, don't necessarily presume it comes from this really stable, feeling confident place. Kind of know that the intensity is a challenge in and of itself. I
mm.
personally think like when I see the card I love to see for people in relationship readings is the Six of Pentacles reversed because it is more grounded. It's grounded anyway because it's pentacles. Six of Pentacles upright is usually a power imbalance. I mean, it could be generous, but it's a
Mm,
power imbalance. But when I see Six of Pentacles reverse, I feel these people are equals in whatever matters to them. It's not like, oh, they have to be equal status wise or whatever, but in what matters to them, they're equals. And that is
mm,
usually easier. Like it is usually
mm,
easier to
mhm,
almost
mhm,
start as
mhm.
friends. But yeah, so I see the tower very specifically in relationship
Yeah.
readings.
Yeah, 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 no, very, very interesting. Um, so I'm going to back up a little bit because
Hmm.
I think this was something that you had said in a previous conversation we had, and that was about you used to do personal physical readings, right? Outside, you said that I think you worked outside a shop,
Yeah,
or you
a
did it
herbalist
within
shop. Yeah.
shops.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you did the in-person readings. Do you find that that's different than doing it over video?
Yeah, and surprisingly, almost counterintuitively, I have found whether over any electronic device, whether it was the phone line ones that I used to do for that brief period of time, or whether it was, just what I do now, I actually think there's something about the electrical energy, which is part of what psychic stuff is, that enhances it. I actually think it's better. It's actually
Ah,
better
yeah,
done
yeah,
over an
yeah, yeah.
electrical
No,
device.
that's
Yeah, and it's not to say you can't. I mean, like I've had friends that I've read for years and done very accurate readings for, and it's face to face. But
Mhm.
yeah, there's something mysterious. I always thought like David Lynch in Twin Peaks when he had all the sort of beings going through electricity, he knew something. Because there's something about
Mhm.
electricity, I think.
No, that makes sense to me because we're all energy. I mean, it's all
Mm,
energy. I
mm,
mean, physics will tell you that, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's not anything unusual in that sense. So one of the things that I wanted to also ask you about was when you said young adulthood, you really started to do the delving into the tarot.
Yep.
So when you started doing that, what was the feedback loop? How long did it take you to know that, yeah, this is really working? Besides your psychic abilities, the tarot in particular, how did
Yeah.
you know that you were doing the right thing?
Okay, couple of things, and it's actually a bit of a hint for people if they're learning tarot.
Mm,
Um, was that like firstly, I will often say that learning tarot is like learning to read. Like like we start with run, spot, run, look at the nice ball sort of thing, and then one day we're reading Shakespeare, and it's like it's kind of a little bit you can't really see what the progress was, but it just happens, and it's getting towards more and more complexity effectively. And I think the same with tarot. So I think that like even though tarot in itself is incredibly powerful, and if you just start with doing a Celtic cross spread or whatever, and you start to learn things,
yeah,
things will come out that are
yeah,
accurate.
mm,
Over time, I started to read combinations of cards. And for a long period of time, I'd do an astrology chart based spread where I did 3 cards for each house because to me, just reading in the combinations gave a lot of nuance and so forth. And it was around that time that once I got to that point and I was reading for people that I would say things and they would come true and like they were very specific. And that's when I got a bit freaked out and I had to work out
mm,
what I thought about it because you're just having fun up until then. You're just reading the
right.
cards and so forth. I do think that most people, when they come to tarot readers, myself included, judge a tarot reader by how accurate they are about what you know already. And
Right,
then
right.
after that, if something's predictive, then you think, wow, okay. And then you tend to sort of go back and think the psychic link is there. So I think, that's sort of part of it. But one of the things I did to learn, apart from learning the meanings or whatever, and building on that complexity, was that apart from reading for friends, I would actually do readings for like celebrities and things like that. Like I not didn't know them, I was just doing it. And so, and I would see what's coming up for them, and then I would wait and see. And like it was very accurate about like the types of movies they might be about to do, or an issue that might suddenly happen that wasn't clear. And you start to sort of see, you start to go, okay, there's something that's going on here. Like, there's something magical about the cards. I can't explain this one bit, and I've said this in interviews,
Yeah,
when I've been interviewing decorators. Like, I can get the psychic link, I can get that
right,
we're all part of the one thing, I can get we're an evolving consciousness, all of that, that's fine. What makes it that the right cards come out? I have
right.
no
I
answer to
know.
that, and I can only think that
Yeah,
it's magic.
right, right,
Because
right.
they are, if you look at something like tarot, there's enough difference
Mm,
in those card meanings that
right,
you can't fake it really.
right,
So
right.
so yeah, like that bit I don't have an explanation for except it's kind of magic. It's sort of the voice of the divine or something.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because and this is a good comparison because if you actually read the newspaper with their little clips of astrology,
Yep.
they could really apply
Hmm.
in a you could it's called what is it? The cognitive bias,
Or
right?
the
You can read
confirmation bias,
into
yeah.
the
Yeah.
bias, yeah,
Yeah.
confirmation, right? That you could read into it in something different. That's totally different from the large
Mm.
readings for astrology that people do that are very in depth. That
Yep.
I know those can be amazingly accurate, but that's where a lot of debunking goes on
Hmm.
with in by and don't I love science, don't get me wrong,
Yep.
and I love the logical and all of that, you know that. So I appreciate it, but the debunking is kind of unfair because
Mm.
what it's looking at is minute predictions, which are so generalized that, of course, you're going to debunk it because
Yep.
it doesn't help. It doesn't go to
Yep.
specifics.
Yep.
And that's the difference. Yeah.
That's so true. It's interesting. I mean, again, having grown up with astrologers, just a little tip my brother gave me years ago, which is if you do want to read the ones in the magazines or whatever, read your ascendant because there's an
Mm,
inbuilt
yes.
assumption there that the Aries is on the ascendant, and so then like and in fact, if you read that, it's going to be much more accurate, which is sort of interesting in and of itself. But again, it's very general. Yeah, an actual chart. But there's also the other thing: if you grow up with it and you have your own chart gone through with a fine tooth comb, as mine was, and all that sort of thing, you learn that even within that, you have to get to know the person and the patterns and how planets work for them. Because some people, their Venus will work well and some won't, and there's all sorts of things about whether they're in their detriment or whatever. There's a whole bunch of of different things about what houses they're in that help you know that, but you kind of need to get to know that over time. And the more that you get to know it, the more accurate it is. But it's really complicated.
Right,
So
right, 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 right.
yeah, but in
But you're
terms of
100% right about the ascendant, because Sagittarius is my ascendant, and if I read that,
yeah.
it
Yeah,
is
it is.
better.
And yeah, I read Gemini
Yeah,
because Gemini is my ascendant. So,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, so that is the case. And the other thing I find interesting about the debunking
Mm,
is that it, I guess you can't. I mean, because psychic, as I say, because you're not everybody's psychic with everybody. I don't think you can do it in
right.
science-based institutions. But there's an English performance artist that I really like. I think he's brilliant. I think he's like amazing.
Mm,
His name's Darren Brown. He debunks this stuff all the time because his viewpoint is because he can use sort of
mm,
like NLP and all sorts of suggestion things. He can make things look like magic. He really can. He says, therefore,
mhm,
because I can do it, it's all not true. But I think that's sort of analogous to saying just because somebody, when they're learning to paint, could paint their version of the Mona Lisa, that somehow, it
mm.
was not anything either. Like I think
There you go.
that the capacity for something to be fake does not mean that it isn't real when it's being done
Yeah,
really. But
right,
yeah,
right, right.
it is a thing that is often sort of like kind of debunked or
Well, it's that quandary, right? You can't prove the existence of
Mhm.
God, nor can you disprove the
Yeah,
existence of God.
exactly.
So it's that whole idea behind that.
Yeah,
Well,
and look,
we are,
I know, like, I could die and there could be nothing. I could die and think, oh, wow, is that what it's really about? What really
well,
frightens me is what I expect is I'm going to die and I won't be any wiser over there either. So I remember like a
yeah,
quote said with mediumship, just because they're dead doesn't mean they're smart.
I think
Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm
that's
hoping
true.
for a big revelation and an answer. I don't care whether I'm right or wrong. I just want to know, but I've just got a funny feeling it doesn't work that way. But who knows?
You mean not 42 from the
Yeah, well, what does
Hitchhiker's
42
Guide
mean?
to you know,
Yeah, tricky.
right.
Love
Uh,
that book.
but we are. I know it's a great book, right? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. If
Yeah.
anyone watching hasn't read it, it's really
Oh,
worth it.
it's the funniest book ever.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But we are at an hour. This has been amazing,
Thank
Alan.
you.
Thank you so much, as always. But um, one thing I just wanted you to know, so if people don't know, the Eye of
Oh,
the
the Serpentara.
Serpent,
Yeah.
Tyro. Yeah, you have an Etsy store,
Yes.
which is well worth checking out if you haven't. I'm going to give you that plug because I know you didn't ask me to,
Thank you.
and I just want everyone to know. Um, I've used it, and I'm a regular, as Helen would say, and that's how I was able to connect with Helen over video and get her insights on so many things. Really inspirational. And ethical, which is a big thing, I think. Um, so that's really information on what you do in your background. Is there anything else you wanted to add or
No,
to the
at the
end of this?
moment, that's the main thing. Like I do that, and I did the YouTube channel so that people who resonated with that would know that there was a reasonable chance we'd have a connection if they did want to do a
Mm,
private reading. But there's never any,
right.
like I don't expect everybody who comes to my YouTube channel to come for a reading. It's just if it's of use to them. I'm toying with the concept of doing another channel, so there might be an
Mhm.
announcement about that fairly soon. But I'm just trying to work out how I would do it, uh, because it's more around world events and stuff, and so like there's a lot more kind of ethical stuff there about being neutral and all
Right.
that kind of thing. So I'm toying with that at the moment. So if that happens, I'll do an announcement on my channel. But otherwise, it's been a delight. Thank you, HT. I really enjoyed the
Yeah,
conversation. I enjoyed our
yeah,
conversations before, so I've been looking forward to this, and it's very kind of you
yeah,
to invite me.
yeah, and yeah. Well, never say never, right? I hopefully you'll do it again,
Yes.
because I do enjoy. I also enjoy it. I mean, there's so much more. I mean, you can tell. I can
Yep.
get you talking, and I love it, and I could have you talking for another 2 hours. I'm sure of it, but I know we all have other things to do. So,
Yeah.
and I do appreciate your time for sure. So thank you so
Thank you.
much, and um. I suppose we can stop.
Yes, yeah, I'll just stop it and as I say, send you the video so that you can upload it. Just so people know it's just that I
I
have
appreciate.
The Zoom capacity to do the recording. So thank you
Yeah.
and goodbye to
Yeah.
everybody.
Hi, everybody. Bye.